Is Christianity against the environment? Of course, you've all been following what's going on in the Gulf right now, and a couple of things brought a few items to attention to me to kind of deal with the issue of environmentalism and Christianity. There have been in the past statements made by people that Christianity is against the environment, and I'll get into a few of those details. But two particular things came to mind about this particular subject. One was a speech that Prince Charles gave to a group of students, an hour-long speech on Islam, Islamic studies, and the Quran's view of the environment. The article goes on to say, in an hour-long speech, the heir to the throne argued that man's destruction of the world was contrary to the scriptures of all religions, but particularly those of Islam. He said the current division between man and nature had been caused not just by industrialization, but also by our attitude to the environment, which goes against the grain of sacred traditions. Now, Prince Charles is certainly involved in the environmental movement. I think he's way off base to say that we need to follow Islam in all of this. If you travel around the world, you'll find that in the majority of cases, those nations which have held to a Christian worldview really have the safest of environments and the cleanest of environments. You travel across the United States, even for people who are not Christians per se, but live within a Christian worldview, you'll see that the United States environmentally is way ahead of most other nations. One of the reasons is, I believe, is because of private property. People tend to keep their own property in better condition than the property of others. The old saying that you don't wash a rented car is true, or you go into a motel room, you generally don't leave it in the condition like you would your own home because it's not yours. Someone else is going to come in and take care of it. In societies where private property is not acknowledged and is not abided by, you begin to see that there's a problem. I'll give you a very personal example. I live next door to 2 acres owned by the Cobb Marietta Water Authority. It's 2 acres. There's a well on the property, and that's why the authority purchased this particular piece of property. Well, it's a mess. Broken tree branches, grasses that are 3 feet high, weeds that are 4 feet high. Because it's right next to my property, I mow the frontage part of it. But the county doesn't care. It's really no one really owns the property. Now, if you were to compare that property to the neighbor to the right of that property and to my property, you'd see a huge difference. Why is that? Because we own our property. We understand the nature of keeping property up. In societies where no one owns the property, you can begin to see the problems that arise. But back to the issue about religion and the environment, and especially Christianity. In 1960, Francis Schaeffer wrote a book called Pollution and the Death of Man, the Christian View of Ecology. Francis Schaeffer saw where the movement was headed before there was a movement, and this is what he wrote. The term God's creation has no real place in pantheistic thinking. Schaeffer was pointing out that most of the environmental movement thought today is based upon pantheism, that everything is God, and if you look at the environment in that way, that you'll protect the environment. It just doesn't work that way. If you choose that route, then you won't do anything with the environment. He goes on to say, one simply does not have a creation, but only an extension of God's essence, in which any such term as God's creation has no place. If the earth is God in and of itself, you'll find that people won't do anything to the environment. They won't see it as a place that you can experiment with, that you can develop things out of, because you'll fear it because it's a God. It is of no use at all because you are tampering with God Himself. And yet, when you read the Bible, you'll see that God created the world independent of Himself. The creation isn't an extension of God in any way. It is, in fact, something independent given to us in terms of a stewardship. This has always been a part of Christianity. Now, one of the accusations that has come against Christianity is based upon some very misinterpreted and bogus quotations by James Watt. James Watt was the Interior Secretary under Ronald Reagan for a couple of years until he made some politically incorrect statements. He was booted out. It had nothing to do with his environmental policies. Although a number of things have been attributed to him, some of them falsely and another one just simply misinterpreted. In 1982, James Watt wrote, Ours is the Earth, which was published in the Saturday Evening Post, the January-February issue of 1982. And he said the following, he says, the Earth is merely a temporary way station on the road to eternal life. The Earth was put here by the Lord for His people to subdue and use for profitable purposes on their way to the hereafter. Now, that is a good thing. God has given us this world, and as a result of this, of us using this creation that God has given us in terms of a stewardship, we have made life better for everybody around the world. It's the abuse of the environment that is the crux of the issue in our day, not the use of the environment. Now, there was a bogus citation attributed to James Watt. Supposedly, he said, this was something on a Bill Moyer show, I believe it was. This was in the Minneapolis Star Tribune, an excerpt of a speech that Bill Moyers had given, and says that that James Watt, President Reagan's first Secretary of the Interior, he says, my favorite online environmental journal, the ever-engaging Grist, reminded us recently of how James Watt told the U.S. Congress that protecting natural resources was unimportant in light of the imminent return of Jesus Christ. In public testimony, he said, now supposedly James Watt said this, after the last tree is felled, Christ will come back. And others have used this. A number of Christians have used this without actually checking the original citation for it. So what did Watt actually say during congressional testimony before the House Interior Committee in 1981? He says, I do not know how many future generations we can count on before the Lord returns. Whatever it is, we have to manage with a skill to leave the resources needed for future generations. And I'm going to read to you the exact testimony at this particular hearing. Mr. Weaver speaking here. Do you want to see on lands under your management the sustained yield policies continued? Secretary Watt, absolutely. Mr. Weaver, I'm very pleased to hear that. Then I will make one final statement. I believe very strongly that we should not, for example, use up all the oil that took nature a billion years to make in 1 century. We ought to leave a few drops of it for our children, their children. They are going to need it. I wonder if you agree also in the general statement that we should leave some of our resources. I am now talking about scenic areas or preservation, but scenic sources for our children, not just gobble them all up at once. Now here's what Secretary Watt said, absolutely. That is the delicate balance the Secretary of the Interior must have to be steward for the natural resources for this generation as well as future generations. I do not know how many future generations we can count on before the Lord returns. Whatever it is, we have to manage with a skill to leave the resources needed for future generations. And so we're beginning to see today that this understanding of the environment really does have a Christian basis. You cannot look at the environment any other way. You can't go to the pantheistic way. Certainly can't go the Islamic way. The Christian view is the only way. God created the world. He has made us stewards of His world, and He wants us to use it for His good, because the last verse of Genesis chapter 1 says that everything that God had created, He saw that it was very good.
American Vision is proud to present this year's Worldview Super Conference, July 21st through 24th at North Metro Church, Marietta, Georgia. For more information, visit conference.americanvision.org. That's conference.americanvision.org.